Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you to Visible Thread for inviting us to participate in Optimize 24. We are very happy to be here, albeit virtually. I'm Sheli Sandell, and my business partner, Natasha Adams, is also on the call and will help address any questions at the end of the presentation. I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, but to suffice it to say, most of our professional lives have been spent exclusively within the world of government bids and proposals, leading large organizations that produced everything from task order responses to multi-volume 10,000 plus page bids. To survive that kind of content generation, we developed a passion for content management. And when we were introduced to SharePoint in 2004, we fell in love with the platform because of all that it offers. After 20 years of Microsoft doing what Microsoft does, it's probably fair to say we now have more of a love-hate relationship with the platform. But ultimately, when leveraged correctly, we have found nothing more powerful when it comes to managing vast amount of information. And that's why we want to talk to you about content management in SharePoint, particularly in the age of AI. Today, we are going to cover why good content management is important in general terms, why it's especially important for AI, why SharePoint excels for content management, some of the best practices that we offer, and then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways. We are planning on having time at the end of the session for questions. First of all, what is content management? Content management is the process of organizing, storing, and maintaining data in a way that makes it easy to access, manage, and share. In general terms, think about a massive book library, how the books are organized so that content can be quickly located and retrieved by author, by title, by genre, by subject matter. How do we translate that to digital information? Instead of brick and mortar facilities, today we leverage platforms like SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, or other content management systems for the technology aspect. However, people and process come first. While an effective content management system requires financial and labor investment, it can start to feel like this illustration. That said, the return on the investment can be significant. You reduce time spent searching for documents and information. You can easily identify and leverage existing high-quality content, capture institutional knowledge and preserve it for future use, reduce the risk of knowledge loss when employees depart the organization. You can scale to accommodate growth without losing control over your documentation. Enhance data-driven decision-making and allow employees, even new hires, to find information and develop quality content faster. And you can improve the effectiveness of AI with structured and accurate content. Ultimately, this will lower your costs in content creation and proposal development. I'm sure many of you have heard the expression garbage in and garbage out. This is a major issue with content management systems in general, but as we begin to leverage and increasingly depend on AI, the quality of the underlying data will drive relevance and accuracy of any output. That said, I like it when my cat sleeps on my keyboard. This quote is from a great article by previous presenter Fergal McGovern, and it sums up the challenges perfectly. Organizations serious about driving value from AI or Gen AI must bite the bullet on proper information architecture. At a minimum, this requires clean folder structures, consistent file naming conventions, scrubbing draft document, and up-to-date tagging. AI thrives on high-quality data to deliver relevant insights. In the context of SharePoint, where large volumes of documents, files, and other content are stored, both the organization and accuracy of the information significantly impact how effective AI can perform. AI needs well-structured data so that it can easily identify and classify documents, recognize duplicate files or irrelevant content, and make the information available for analysis more quickly. If SharePoint content is incomplete or disorganized, context can be lost, leading to inaccurate results. I love this image, and I've included it here because we see organizations that are using SharePoint but are failing to leverage most of the functionality. And SharePoint has a lot of functionality. This image perfectly represents what we find. And this is a picture, if you can't see the image clearly, this is a picture of a horse pulling a car. Why is SharePoint so good at content management? Because SharePoint provides extensive functionality such as metadata tagging, customized file structures that can be tailored to specific projects, specialized repositories for lists and libraries that allow for organized, easy to navigate collections of content. This was a game changer for me. The absolute configuration control I finally had available to me as a proposal manager and to my team. Versioning and advanced search tools powered by metadata and content indexing make finding information faster and more reliable. Users can access documents and collaborate in real time, regardless of their location. And SharePoint seamlessly integrates with tools like Teams, Office, OneDrive, Outlook. Very important for government contractors, SharePoint offers extensive security options down to the most granular level. It helps meet regulatory requirements by providing detailed audit logs and retention policies. SharePoint integrates with Power Automate, formerly Microsoft Flow, allowing the automation of workflows such as document approvals, notifications, tasks, assignments. Whether you're managing thousands of documents across multiple contracts or just a few projects, SharePoint can scale to meet your needs without compromising its performance. SharePoint can enforce governance requirements through retention labels, policies, and automated archiving. For anyone working against strict project timelines and workflows, SharePoint offers task and project tracking. With integrated lists and calendars, you can manage milestones, assign responsibilities, and track deliverables, and you can even sync with Microsoft Project. All of this functionality is included with Office 365. And finally, with increasing adoption of remote work, SharePoint enables mobile and offline access. Another trend we're seeing is organizations using SharePoint, but creating a single document library and dumping all of their content into that repository. SharePoint offers specialized repositories for different types of information. Using the correct repository for the respective content can provide additional features and functionality and will help AI better understand the data. Here's some, this is not an all-inclusive list, but this is the usual suspects, especially when it comes to proposal development. For example, we talk about picture libraries. They are designed specifically to manage images. When you use a picture library to store your images, you can easily view thumbnails, as well as image-specific data. And we're going to talk about that metadata a little bit down the road here. We know that data consistency and accuracy allows AI to train more efficiently and to handle large volumes of data without compromising performance. So let's talk about some approaches to address managing content. As Fergal referenced, this includes folder structures, file naming conventions, metadata or tagging, as well as the all-important manual process of curation. AI relies on contextual information to classify, index, and retrieve data. By mirroring an organization's workflow, folder hierarchy and file names can provide clues about the content's purpose, stage, department, etc. The example shown in the first bullet provides contextual clues such as the project, the timeline, the department, and the document type. So AI can determine that the file is related to a project proposal for client A in 2024. Minimizing folder depths as much as possible is a best practice with or without AI. AI's ingestion issues aside, risks of deeply nested folders are many. They include subfolders hiding files. Multiple copies of the same document can be saved in different folders, creating confusion and will impact your configuration control. If you have a deeply nested structure, you are clicking in and out of folders. And if you have a lot of folders, that's a lot of clicking in and out and in and out and in and out while you look for your information. Too many nested folders will create a file path that will prohibit content from being saved. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. If files are moved to another folder or they're renamed, shared links to those documents will break. And it's hard to restructure folders in SharePoint with a nested organization. Finally, leveraging a repeatable folder structure not only helps your users locate information, it provides AI with a predictable framework. For example, you might use a standard structure for all proposal efforts, and you may have something that looks like this. This is a rather detailed sample and assumes large, complex efforts, which is not a one-size-fits-all. Obviously, you want to organize your bids to fit your needs. If you do small responses or task orders, you're going to want a simpler structure. If you do small responses, you do task orders, you do large proposals, you may want to adopt a hybrid approach that depends on the type of the opportunity. When relying on folder structures to organize a process like proposal development, one thing to consider is clear communication with your users on where they are currently working. When Natasha and I do SharePoint development for our clients, one of the things we try not to do is have files moving around during the process because you can break your configuration control. However, if you are working with kind of the historical legacy way of doing proposals using these folders, and you will be moving your files around, make sure your authors know where they are working. Consistent folder and file naming is another best practice whether or not AI is involved, especially if you're not leveraging metadata. When collaborating, standard file names reduce confusion and streamline the collaboration process across different users and teams. Standardized naming ensures that files are sorted logically and allow users to quickly find data. When team members work together, consistent file names ensure clarity and reduce the risk of miscommunication. Naming conventions can help organizations meet compliance requirements and make it easier to categorize, store, and manage files systematically. Think ISO. You can prevent file duplication by making it easier to recognize existing documents and avoid redundant file creation. And proper naming conventions ensure that files remain understandable and accessible over time, especially to users who were not involved in their original creation. We love this cartoon because we found this exact data entry issue recently with one of our clients. Only our client had at least 7 variations on how they were listing the United States of America. So, how do we translate this into practical application? The first piece of advice I can give, and this is a biggie, is leverage those SharePoint features I mentioned earlier regarding configuration control. The file name that you're seeing here in this email is an example of what not to do. Historically, to manage configuration control, one approach for file naming was to include the author's initials, the version number, the edit date, and so on. Back in the day, like shown here, proposal sections would fly back and forth via email, or people would edit sections and dump them into folders on the server. It was a necessary approach to keep track of changes. And I speak as someone who managed large bids back before all this newfangled technology. The thing is, we still see this in our client SharePoint systems, and it's one of the most common things we procedurally correct when we are engaged to help them figure out why they can't find anything. SharePoint provides robust versioning information, including who made the changes and when they did it. By relying on the system to manage configuration control, the only version displayed is the latest. We and AI can assume it is the most current, accurate file. When you create lots of documents that are versions of each other, you are undermining the system. Now, that said, this assumes that you are actually working within SharePoint and not simply using it as a dumping ground. Raise your hands. Moving on from what not to do, here are some things you can do. The individual repositories in the folder structure you are employing already give context. File names provide additional information. As you establish conventions, a good practice is to work from general to more specific for element order. But the priority should be what's most important to your users. Is it the document type, project name, the year, the department, and so on? And of course, as you're coming up with file naming conventions, you want to avoid reserved symbols and empty spaces before and after your file names. Naming will define your default folder and file order. So for example, if the date is important to you, a year, month, day format is an effective way to sort by date. Leading zeros are another effective technique in ensuring sorting. Just make sure you include enough leading zeros to accommodate the anticipated volume of documents. And remain consistent with the format. Determine whether you're using periods, underscores, or hyphens, and so on as your separators. Also, use abbreviations to keep names short. Lengthy file paths can wreak havoc when they exceed system limitations. For example, for SharePoint Online and OneDrive, you have a limit of 400 characters after the domain. And if you are syncing with your computer, additional limitations within your operating system also exist. Here are some examples. A tip for providing longer descriptions if you need to is use the title field in SharePoint. It's a lot to think about, and coming up with solid naming conventions is not an easy task. This is funny, but the point is you may want to exercise caution regarding who has responsibility for developing your conventions. Although I'm kind of digging the hat size of the nearest squirrel. While not all AI systems ingest SharePoint metadata, also referred to as tags, fields, or columns, metadata is an extremely powerful aspect of content management and is functionality that we see majorly underused within SharePoint. We see organizations that do not use metadata at all. If you're not familiar with what metadata is, shown in this illustration, if the bottle is a piece of data, the metadata is the data about the data. It allows for increased accuracy during searches. It accommodates flexible organization as you can implement various views of your content and tailor them to the business or the user needs. And it enhances collaboration because you can add fields for at-a-glance status information, for comments, author assignments, page restrictions, notes, things like that. Importantly, assuming your content is growing, metadata makes it easy to manage and retrieve documents without sifting through folders and files. And metadata aids efficient filtering and sorting of lots of information. Here's an example. Imagine you are trying to organize documents about hundreds of dog breeds. This repository that you're seeing here, I think we had close to 200 documents on dog breeds within it. Using a standard folder structure, one approach might be to organize the information like this, using nested folders to group by class, then by size, and then by coat. So if I'm looking for a file on Belgian sheepdogs, I need to know that it's classified as a large herding breed with long hair. If I know these things, no problem. However, if I don't know any of that information, I am going to be clicking in and out of folders. Now, if we add metadata to these files, we can actually eliminate the need for folders. Here is the same repository, just a different view. Looking at the column headings, you can see we've added metadata and hidden the folders. This view groups the document by one of the metadata fields, dog size. The class or group of breed is displayed as the first column. Their coat is another column. The other columns contain additional metadata relevant to each of the dog breeds. We can now get to our Belgian sheepdog in a variety of ways. For power users in SharePoint, visual indicators are an elegant option to represent the data and can also improve the user experience. Now, if we take talking about dog breeds and translate that to government proposal content, relevant metadata might look more like this. The columns shown here enable users to filter and sort a large volume of data by varying criteria, making it easier for users to find what they need. This is so powerful in SharePoint because you determine the metadata that makes sense for your organization and for your content. And if you are using the correct repositories, like we talked about earlier, for the respective content, you can have custom metadata for each of those repositories that makes sense for that information. And for proposal information, if you are frequently looking for your bids by customer, you include that as a column to quickly sort and filter on. That said, if you are not currently using metadata in your SharePoint, add the child count columns within your repositories. This can improve the user experience because populated folders are clearly indicated. If you use this approach, though, keep in mind that item child count will not include subfolder item counts. One of the biggest and surprisingly frequent challenges that Natasha and I encounter with organizations using SharePoint is an expectation that once the data is loaded, the system will magically manage the content itself. Remember that brick and mortar library we started with? Those books do not organize and catalog themselves. A librarian is key. The same thing is true with digital content. It requires a curator, or chaos will ensue. I promise you, it will ensue, especially at the exponential rate that data today grows. Clearly defined ownership ensures that someone is responsible for the accuracy, the relevance, and the timeliness of content, which is all critical for AI. Not to mention users know who to call. When content owners maintain uniformity in structure, quality, and updates, content remains current and useful as information or processes evolve. Organizations can even enforce quality standards, ensuring that content meets predefined criteria. Having a point person also helps in managing and coordinating related content across different departments or teams, reducing duplication and gaps. If you're using metadata, curators can tag and categorize content in a way that makes it even easier for users to locate the information they need. I realize that was a lot I just threw at you, but the key takeaways are here. Structured content management is important with or without AI. It's even more important for maximizing if you are using AI. Accurate data, standard folder structures, consistent naming convention prove results. And SharePoint metadata enhances information discoverability and usability. It will make your life so much easier when you are looking for information. And last but not least, continuous curation of the system is essential. I cannot stress that enough for long-term success. Before we end, I have one more funny, because this is what we are trying to avoid. Again, I'm Sheli Sandell, and Natasha Adams is also on the phone from Wicked Point. If you'd like to chat with us more about SharePoint or content management, please feel free to reach out to us directly.